When it comes to the Bible, numbers aren't just numbers. They pretty much represent the entirety of life and existence. From 2 to 3 to 153, here are the meanings of these essential biblical numbers. In the Bible, the number 2 can refer to unity, as in the creation of Adam and Eve, or Jesus and his symbolic bride, the church. But it can also represent division, as in the divided kingdoms of Israel and Judah, or the distinction between the Old and New Covenants. But most often, the number 2 is used in the context of the number of witnesses needed to verify a statement as true. This law is made explicit in the first letter to Timothy, which says, "Do not entertain an accusation against an elder unless it is brought by 2 or 3 witnesses." There are multiple examples throughout the Bible where 2 witnesses appear, such as Joshua and Caleb, who were the 2 truthful spies sent into the Holy Land.
And in the New Testament, there were 2 witnesses who accused Jesus before the Sanhedrin.
Perhaps the most interesting example are the 2 witnesses from Revelation who will be killed for their efforts in opposing the false prophet, who are traditionally understood to be Enoch and Elijah. The number 3 appears many times throughout the Bible as a symbol of completeness, stability, and strength. Within Judaism, there are 3 patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And there are also 3 pilgrimage festivals, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Furthermore, prophets such as Elijah and Daniel call upon God or pray 3 times to make their requests more effective. 3 is arguably even more significant in Christianity. After his crucifixion, Jesus remained in the grave for 3 days, a symbolic echo of the time that the prophet Jonah spent 3 days in the belly of a big fish. Additionally, the doctrine of the Trinity is central to Orthodox Christianity, which teaches that God exists as 3 persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, bore witness to Jesus' transfiguration, where he was joined by Moses and Elijah, making for yet another trio.
Good it is that we are here. We will make 3 tents.
3.5 is a surprisingly common symbol in biblical numerology, which makes sense when you realize that it's half of 7, which is the number of completion. Thus, 3.5 is a natural symbol for incompleteness. The most prominent biblical example is the apocalyptic vision of the prophet Daniel, in which an angel foretells that there will come a time, times, and half a time. That is to say, a year, 2 years, and half a year, or 3.5 years total. During this period, the faithful Israelites will suffer persecution under a beast that many understood to represent Antiochus Epiphanes, the Greek ruler who desecrated the temple in the 2nd century BCE. The book of Revelation also uses the span of 3.5 years throughout its various visions. The author of Revelation also utilizes 42, which is the number of months in 3.5 years, as well as 1,260, which is the number of days in the same period. The number 4 is used in biblical context to represent the earth and the natural world. This is still done in non-religious ways as well, in terms of the 4 seasons, the 4 cardinal directions, the 4 classic elements, and so on. In the Bible, 4 can represent totality in the way that the 4 corners of the earth means everything everywhere. This exact phrase is in fact used in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 12. In the prophetic vision of Ezekiel, the chariot throne is being guided by 4 living creatures made up of 4 types of animals: lion, bull, eagle, and man. They represent the 4 kings of the animal kingdom: wild, domestic, sky, and everything. Furthermore, they can see and move in the 4 cardinal directions without turning. These 4 creatures also show up in Revelations and later become symbols for the 4 gospel writers. Another famous quartet representing the entire world is the 4 rivers that flow out of the Garden of Eden in Genesis. Probably the most significant symbolic number in all of the Bible is 7, which represents completion and perfection. The Bible, of course, begins with the 7 days of creation, including the 7th day on which God rested. 7 reappears in Judaism as the number of laws of Noah, the number of patriarchs and matriarchs, the number of branches of the temple menorah, and the length of several significant holidays. Additionally, groups of 7 years are at the heart of the agricultural cycle and the forgiveness of debts. 7 is also in the book of Revelation 54 times in the form of 7 churches, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls.
When Peter asks Jesus how many times he should forgive someone, he expects Jesus to say 7, but instead he says 70 times 7, or 77 depending on the translation, to essentially indicate infinity.
But you must forgive them.
Additionally, there are also 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit named in the first letter to the Corinthians. If 7 is the number of perfect completion, it makes sense that the numbers adjacent to it have metaphorical weights as well. Unsurprisingly then, 8 represents new beginnings. Notably, after God flooded the earth in Genesis, there were 8 survivors left to repopulate the world: Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their wives. Similarly, in Jewish tradition, male children are circumcised on the 8th day of their life. This includes Jesus, which is why January 1st, 8 days after Christmas, is the Feast of Circumcision in some churches. And if you're a fan of Adam Sandler, you surely know that the Feast of Hanukkah lasts for 8 crazy nights. And as described in the Book of Numbers, the dedication of the tabernacle also occurred over an 8-day ceremony. Like 3 and 7, 10 can also be used to represent a complete set, thanks in part to the average human having 10 fingers and the base 10 numeral system. This sense of totality has both positive and negative connotations of power. The most obvious biblical example is the 10 Commandments.
These 15! 10 commandments for all to obey.
Another example happens when God tells Abraham that he intends to destroy Sodom. Abraham convinces God to spare them if there are just 10 righteous people within the walls. And a tithe, which is an offering made to God, is meant to be 1/10 of one's earnings. As for negative examples, 10 of the tribes of Israel are lost to the Assyrian conquest, and there are 10 generations from the creation of Adam until the destruction of humankind during the time of Noah. Additionally, the prophet Daniel foresees the coming of a beast with 10 horns, representing the 10 kings of the last and greatest earthly kingdom. And Revelation describes both the red dragon and the beast from the sea as having 10 horns as a sign of their all-encompassing power. 12 is yet another number that represents completion, in this case relating specifically to authority, both human and divine. For example, Israel is built around 12 tribes descending from the 12 sons of Jacob. In the book of Leviticus, God tells the Israelites that it's the job of the priest to set 12 loaves of unleavened bread with incense in the temple every week. And the prophet Ezekiel foretells that the New Jerusalem of the Messianic age will have 12 gates, one for each of the 12 tribes. In the New Testament, Jesus selected 12 apostles to be the primary teachers of his message following his ascension into heaven. And Revelation features multiple uses of this number, with the 12-gated New Jerusalem, 12 angels at 12 gates, 12 fruits of the tree of life, and 12 jewels on the crown of Christ's bride. One of the most common symbolic numbers in the Bible is 40. It's used to denote a full period of time, such as a generation being represented as 40 years. Some of the most famous biblical stories talk about major events happening over the course of 40 days, such as the Great Flood, Moses being taught the law on Mount Sinai, Moses' spies investigating the Promised Land, and Goliath taunting the Israelite army before David kills him. Other examples include Elijah fasting for 40 days, Jonah preaching in Nineveh for 40 days, Jesus being tested by Satan in the desert for 40 days, and Jesus remaining for 40 days after his resurrection before ascending to heaven. Then there are the significant events that happen over the course of 40 years. Perhaps most famously, the Israelites are forced to wander the desert for that long after escaping Egypt. Additionally, Moses lived in Egypt for 40 years before God chose him to liberate his people from slavery.
Let my people go.
Additionally, the righteous kings David and Solomon both reigned for 40 years each. If you take two symbolic numbers and multiply them, you often arrive at another symbolic number. For example, 70 is the product of 7 and 10. Two numbers that represent totality and legal power. In traditional Jewish teachings, there were 70 nations of the world, with a total of 70 languages and 70 angels guarding them. Tradition says that when the Hebrew Bible was first translated into Greek, it was done simultaneously by 70 rabbis. They were sequestered from each other, but still produced 70 identical translations. For this reason, the Greek Old Testament is known as the Septuagint. In the book of Numbers, Moses appoints 70 elders to serve as judges. And according to the prophet Jeremiah, God condemns Israel to spend 70 years in captivity in Babylon. Similarly, the prophet Daniel says that Jerusalem will suffer for 70 times 7, or 490 years, for its transgressions. Most of these symbolic numbers are either single digits or nice round multiples of 10. But then there's 153, which is the extremely specific number of fish in the Gospel of John that the disciples catch with Jesus' miraculous help after a day of coming up dry.
Put that down for a catch.
To fully understand why this specific number is meaningful, you need to know about gematria, a numerological practice common in Judaism. In both Hebrew and Greek, numbers are represented by letters instead of separate numerals. The letter alpha means 1, beta means 2, gamma is 3, and so on. Thus, it's easy to assign numerical values to words. In Ezekiel chapter 47, God shows Ezekiel a vision of a spring full of living water that abounds with all kinds of fish. The name of this spring is an Eglion, which when converted into numbers adds up to 153. This is a somewhat mystical image that Jesus is conjuring for his fishers of men, who elsewhere in the Gospel of John he calls his rivers of living water. Perhaps the most infamous number in the Christian Bible is 666, the so-called number of the beast. It appears in the book of Revelation in conjunction with the beast of the apocalypse, whose name is said to be the number 666. The mark of the beast will be a representation of this number, and in the end times, nobody will be able to buy or sell without this mark. Specifically, Revelation chapter 13, verse 18 says, "This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man." This could be understood to mean that 666 represents humankind, as the number 6 stands for both humanity and falling short of perfection. However, the prevailing view among scholars is that this number refers to a specific person who would have been viewed as a beast by 1st century CE Christians. If you write the Greek spelling of the name Nero Caesar in Hebrew, you get the equivalent of NRONQSR, the numerical value of which adds up to 666. If you use the Latin spelling, you get NROQSR, which adds up to 616, a variant number that appears in several early manuscripts of Revelation. Despite how ominous this number sounds nowadays, 666 was previously just a way for Christians to secretly name their oppressor.